What if we've been coaching athletes all wrong? We spend years drilling plays, lifting weights, chasing stats, but almost no time teaching how to think, communicate, or lead. My guest today, Amit Chitre, wrote The Other Playbook, and it's changing how student athletes prepare for life beyond the game. If you are a coach, parent, or athlete, this one's going to hit home. Amit, welcome to the EOR podcast. Let's go. Hey, everybody, I'm Quinn Magnuson, your host for the Effort Over Results podcast. Welcome back to the show. Today's guest is someone who is changing how we think about leadership, mindset, and communication, especially for the next generation of athletes. Amit Chitre is a seasoned communications strategist, educator, and former broadcast journalist who has spent his career helping leaders and teams show up better. He's worked with Fortune 500s, nonprofits, and national organizations like the American Heart Association, and now runs his own consultancy, R3 Communications, where he coaches leaders to get the right message to the right audience at the right time. But today we're going to talk about something special, near and dear to my heart. His brand new book, The Other Playbook, is a guide that helps student athletes build the mental, emotional, and leadership skills they will need far beyond the field. So we're going to dig into what inspired the book, how athletes can translate effort and mindset into real-world leadership, and why communication, not just competition, is the real differentiator in success. Amit, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So let's go back. I always like to go back with my guests and really talk about where it all started. So you started in broadcast journalism, and ironically enough, when I went to Washington State, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I entered the Edward R. Murrow School of Communications to be a broadcast journalist. But you started there, and then you transitioned into leadership communication. So what through line really connected those two worlds for you?
Boy, the through line is probably just, I've always been fascinated in how people communicate. I always liked watching the news, not just to learn about what's going on, but I was fascinated by how people said things and what they said and why they said it, and also paid attention to what they didn't say and why they didn't say that. And so that's always kind of fascinated me. I've always been fascinated by storytelling as well. That's probably what got me into communications in the first place. And as a reporter, you help people tell their stories. You report that, not just report the news, but it's storytelling. And I started off in small to mid-sized markets, bouncing around the country. And at some point, as many broadcast journalists often do, you transition out of that career into something else. And I landed in PR. I was at an agency for a short while, and then I did some nonprofit PR where I was helping the organization tell its story through communications. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, I launched my own communications consultancy. And this is what I really enjoy doing, is helping senior leaders deliver their message, whether it's to their internal staff, whether it's to media, to board members, to customers, to the public. It's helping them find the right way to tell their story. That's kind of the through line to all of this.
Interesting. I liked what you said about, how do you format that story in terms of being a leader, not only for yourself, but for your company. And I know that you probably learned some key lessons from your journalism days that still influence how you teach these leaders. So what are some of the early lessons you learned in journalism that still would resonate today with how you coach leaders and even athletes?
I think number one, and this sounds like one of those, buzzwords, but authenticity is key. You can't pretend to be someone you're not. If you are if you can't pretend to be a hardliner if you're not. I think employees see through that, teams see through that. You have to be authentic and true to yourself. And we can get into this in the branding discussion, but figuring out what is it that you stand for and then leaning into that. There's no one correct leadership style. I think there are many different ways you can be a strong and effective leader. You have to find out what works for you. And I think authenticity is the key.
Yeah, I would wholly agree. In fact, today I heard somebody say, they simplified it. They said leadership is influence. And I love that simple one-word definition of it, because if you're in the industry, in the ecosystem that you and I play in terms of leadership and leadership training and development, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different approaches and philosophies to what good leadership looks like. Obviously, I think leadership has changed over the past 100 years, certainly, and it seems to change even more so now, but it really is just influence. So how do you influence people but still be authentic, because I think that's critical for people to truly see a leader for who they are, and that can be being a bit vulnerable at times. It's having integrity, and it is bringing that genuine authentic self to the workplace or whoever the group it is that you're leading. You've worked with obviously corporate executives to nonprofit teams and now with athletes, but how do those experiences in the workplace and in business and in high level corporate world, how do they shape your approach to working with student athletes now?
It was a very interesting transition. I think what really flipped the switch for me was my family and my kids. And so I just want to give you the quick backstory of where the book came around. Is I gave this corporate training. I've been giving it for years around personal brand development, and the genesis of the training is I encourage the people I work with to look at yourself as a product. It sounds cynical, but you're no different than a can of Coke or a cell phone or an automobile. And these companies, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure you feel a certain way when you interact with that product. When you walk into a Starbucks, you feel a certain way. Well, it's intentional. They think about everything from the lighting, the smell, the layout of the store, the packaging, the price. And so companies spend a lot of time and resources thinking about this. As individuals, we have to think of ourselves as a product with customers and be really intentional about how we want our customers to engage with us. And so that was the crux of this corporate training that I've been giving for years. Well, I was giving it to one client in particular, and the night before, I wanted to run through the presentation just one more time in front of a live audience to stay sharp. And so I sat my three boys down. They were in middle school and high school at the time, and they reluctantly sat on the couch. And as I was going through the presentation, I had that light bulb moment of why are we waiting until people are career professionals to teach them these skills? There really are life lessons that students need to learn, and specifically student athletes. All three of my boys played high school sports, and two play in college. I've been very actively involved in our community in volunteering as a coach and running the travel basketball program. And so I've interacted with a lot of student athletes as well. And I see that there is a gap when we talk to students about leadership and values. It's very much a one-way conversation, right? So when students join a team, they often have to sign a code of conduct or these are the values for the school district. And I joke, it's kind of like reading the cell phone contract. You scroll through it and you click I accept at the bottom because you want to get to the good stuff. But there's nothing that really engages the student in getting them to think about who is the person that I want to be? What is it that I want to stand for? And how do I drive that to my different customers, so to speak? And for student athletes, think about the different customers they're going to have over the next few years, right? They've got their coaches and teammates, certainly, their parents and family members, of course, but you could have recruiters and scouts and college admissions officers and potential employers. And now in today's world, you could have sponsors and NIL and fans, and all of these people are making judgments about you. And so similar to the corporate world where you need to think about how you are resonating with different audiences and different customers, that's a lesson that really needs to be taught at a much younger age, specifically to student athletes.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Sorry, everybody, for interrupting the show. I just came to you to ask a favor. If you enjoy the content we're putting out here on Effort Over Results, the podcast, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing. We're not going to spam you. We do 1 to 2 episodes a week, and we would just love to have more people see and hear the great guests that we're getting on each week here on the show. So that's one request I have. The other request I have is for you to go to our website, effortoverresults.com, poke around, take a look, see if there's anything there that really excites you or gets you energized as a business owner, as a leader. I think you'll find something interesting there. And we have assessments for your team and for you to find out if you are truly leading with an effort over results philosophy. And now, let's get back to the show. That brings up a great question because, once again, you've worked with corporate executives and now you're working with high school athletes. I would imagine there may be even more risk mitigation for a 17-year-old a teenager coming out of high school than there may be for an adult corporate executive, largely because of social media. I'm going to go back to, the 1900s when I was being recruited. The coaches that talked to me didn't really know anything about me other than what I said to them or my parents said to them or what my coach said to them. They couldn't go on social media. They couldn't scope out, any of my socials. Today, these kids are everywhere. They try to keep their social media private, but going back to my comment on risk mitigation, am I kind of coming close to being right in that these student athletes, there's far more risk mitigation for a PR officer, say like yourself, to help them with their brand than there is for a corporate executive?
Yeah, 100%. And it's probably more significant than most people realize. So
Yeah.
I do come at this from a corporate communications perspective because I've done a lot of crisis communications in my career. And so for the high school student, yes, it's important for them to realize that, one post on social media or put yourself in the wrong situation at the wrong time, and you can really significantly harm everything you've worked for all of these years. And so you need to think about that from a risk mitigation standpoint. But think about this, Quinn, from the university's perspective. How often do you hear in the news of a student athlete doing something that could potentially damage the school's brand? I mean, just last month, the NCAA, I think, has launched an investigation into 12 athletes across 6 colleges on this gambling scandal where players may have even bet on their own games. You hear stories in the news about potential criminal activity involving sexual violence, criminal violence, academic integrity. And each time these news stories come up, it's a significant risk to the individual player, the people that player impacted, but the school's brand itself. And so I've really intended this for high school and college students, but it's something that universities really need to pay attention to because here's an opportunity. If we can engage students before they set foot on campus and get them thinking about who is the person I want to be? How do I develop the best version of myself to be successful, not just in sports, but in sports, school, and life? That significantly decreases the risk all the way around for the individual and for the universities that these students are going to.
But you have a lot of inner city kids. You have a lot of kids that come from poverty situations. You have a lot of kids that come from, socioeconomic backgrounds that are just not favorable to them, to no fault of their own, let's say. But there is a lot of backstory there. How do you mitigate the risk in that? And can you work with athletes like that? Have you worked with athletes like that who have a backstory that is not very pretty and change that so that they clean up their act?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways to look at it. One is it's far easier to prevent a crisis than to resolve a crisis, right? And so if we can work with students and get them to understand, hey, think about all the time and the work and energy you've put into getting this far. Think about all the people, your parents and coaches who've invested their time in helping you get this far. You don't want to risk that, right? And if we can teach them that and get them again thinking about themselves as a product, like, okay, if you feel that you have a bright future, what do you want that future to be? How do you want people to view you? And this book gives them some ownership of that. We're not telling them you have to be this, this, and this, but you decide what is it that you want to be and what are the behaviors that you're going to drive to get to that point. And so I think giving them some ownership rather than saying you must do this and you must do that, giving them some ownership helps them feel part of the process and they can drive the person that they want to be. They're not being told. The second part of it is, everyone loves a redemption story. And so the thing with brands is even when you mess up, and most of us do, everyone makes mistakes. I don't think that that's unreasonable. There's always an opportunity to fix it, to recalibrate and go back to, hey, you know what? I made a mistake here, but this really isn't who I was. I've committed to being this. I want to recommit to go to do that. Or it's a chance to reevaluate and say, hey, maybe I said I wanted to be this type of person, but now based on my environment and how circumstances have changed, I want to move in another direction. So there is a chance to always evolve. We can always evolve to become better people. I don't necessarily think that having a quote unquote baggage or a backstory will prevent you from being that best person or the best version of you that you want to be.
Well, and I think people need to understand, and this is where I think NIL has changed the landscape to the negative. But I think people need to understand that once again, like I said, a lot of these kids come from backgrounds that, to no fault of their own, they were born into really poor environments. And I don't mean poor just financially. I mean just the entire situation was very non-conducive to them growing up to be um upstanding citizens. Sports was their way out.
Right.
And people need to understand that a lot of these athletes, it's really, once again, like I said, to no fault of their own, they are just still kids. And this is where a lot of people will pipe up and say, well, we're paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars. They need to grow up. Yeah, you tell me what you were doing at 17, right? So I think there is a little bit of levity given to these student athletes. But once again, if they keep making the mistake over and over and over, that changes the story. Now, I want to talk about NIL. And for those of you out there who don't know, surprisingly enough, Amit, I was surprised at how many people don't know that college athletes can now get paid
Yes.
a lot of money these days. NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. And the concept of it was brought about, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, about the Ed O'Bannon class action suit against the NCAA for money that he felt he could have made on his name, image, and likeness while he was a basketball player at UCLA. Long story short, for those folks out there, they went to the Supreme Court because NCAA athletes were basically saying, listen, you, the school, are making money off of my name, my image, and my likeness. We want a piece of that. We deserve to get paid. And I go back to a story I tell Amit of when it was 1989. I was a freshman at Washington State University on a football scholarship. And this is back in the days when the NCAA didn't allow anything. So I'm standing at a bus stop in like 10-degree Fahrenheit weather. It's snowing. It's basically a blizzard. And a coach drives up to the bus stop, rolls down the window, sees me, and he goes, "Hey, Quinn, I would love to give you a ride home, but I can't. NCAA."
That's unbelievable.
And I'm like, and I'm like, yeah, coach, I get it, I understand, because that's just the way it was back then. He couldn't even lend me $3 to take the bus if I needed the $3, right? Back then, may
Wow.
have been 50 cents. But now you have NIL kind of blew things wide open. The NCAA loses their Supreme Court lawsuit, legal battle. They basically throw their hands up and go, fine, okay, well, I guess we're out. And they felt like they had no guardrails on it. And that's really how NIL started, was with no guardrails. And this name, image, and likeness basically just became pay for play. The NIL thing is really just a moniker, but what it means is that these athletes are getting paid whatever the school can afford, the boosters can afford, the team program can afford, to bring in the best players into their program. So for those of you out there, NIL is name, image, and likeness. So how is name, image, and likeness changed the way, and I realize you've only just sort of entered this forum, despite your experience in years in PR and executive coaching. How has that changed, and how will it continue to change the way you might coach athletes on their brand without becoming quote unquote their agent?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it increases the stakes, right? The stakes are higher because more people feel like under NIL, I have an opportunity to have a career, earn money, provide for my family where I might not have. You could have a college athlete who understands that I may not have a shot to go pro, but I can get into a big time college program, pick up a few sponsors, make some money that sets me off to start my career and help out my family. So I think higher stakes, that's first and foremost. What I think people need to understand when we talk about brand is that we're not trying to create athletes specifically to sell them for name, image, likeness. The goal isn't to, okay, let's find athlete A, figure out how we can polish him or her off and package them so we can land sponsorships. When I talk about brand, I talk about how you're perceived by others. And that could be sponsors and fans, sure, but it could be across those customers in all aspects of your life. And so I'm really thinking about what's the best version of you? What's the best version of you that you can create for all of those customers? Because here's the sad truth of it for all athletes, and you'll know this as well as anyone, for every athlete that's ever played, your athletic career ends at some point, whether it's the professional level, the college level, high school level, whenever it is, at some point, athletics ends. And so, who is the person that you want to be at that point? You can't automatically flip a switch and say, okay, now that that's done, I'm going to be this new person. So when we talk about brand development, I work with students and coaches who work with students to figure out what's the best version that we can put out there for all these aspects. And if you're authentic and true to it, you'll find a sponsor or a company that it might resonate with, or you'll find a fan base that might resonate with. But it's more toward building the best version of you.
I want to get your take on something, and then I want to talk about your book because I think it's going to be an incredibly interesting situation to apply this book, The Other Playbook, which I love the name, by the way, to student athletes and what they're going through today. But when it comes to NIL and these players getting paid, I'm all for student athletes getting the opportunity to make money on top of their scholarship. And I think back to that day standing in front of the bus stop where it would have been nice to just get a ride from my coach. It's obviously gotten out of hand. There needed to be guardrails. Some of the guardrails, and I'm not an expert on this, but only because I've seen this as a constant observer of what's been going on, that I think should happen is the concept of players transferring schools. Literally, it seems like quarterly, if not yearly. Four schools in 4 years, things like that. High school players getting money right out of high school. There needs to be what would be one or two guardrails you would put on NIL right now that you think would calm the storm?
Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, there are so many different ways we can go with this. First, backing up to how we got here, you're right. It was a little bit of the wild, wild west. And I think the philosophy was kind of the market will correct itself, right? I mean, that's one of the foundational planks of capitalism is that the
Mhm.
market always corrects itself. And I think the NCAA maybe had that hope of, okay, we'll allow it. We'll see what happens and the market will adjust. It will correct itself. But that's gotten us to this point. And you're right. I don't think this is the best solution for everyone. I am in favor of the athletes getting paid. I do think they
Mhm.
bring tremendous value to the colleges and the universities, and it's really remarkable the economic impact a player can have on an entire community, right? And so they should get a slice of that. One of the guardrails, I think, is revisiting the transfer rule. There used to be a rule in the NCAA of when you transferred, if it was for certain reasons, you would have to sit out a year before you were eligible to play again. And they became more relaxed with that. They said, well, we'll allow some type of waivers in some cases. And then now it's
Hardship situations, yeah.
right, right. And now people are transferring and playing the next season right away. I wonder if a rule was reinstated that after a transfer, in most cases, you would have to sit for a full year, how that would impact it. I think maybe people may think twice about jumping ship every year just to try to find the best opportunity. Also, we can say that, but I'm sure it raises some legal questions as well, because if you argue, well, I'm a student, but I'm also an employee, and I know there's been a Supreme Court case about that as well, are
Right.
students employees, then it becomes a right to work issue of, well, why can't I transfer jobs? You and I, if we don't like our company, we could transfer and work somewhere else and we don't have to sit out a year. We can work right away and earn another paycheck. And so that's a rule I think that might help what we're seeing. But, I could also understand the counter argument of if it's a right to work type of situation.
It could be, or you get one free pass, one free transfer. Okay, fine, you can go to our school and play right away. But if you do it again, you're sitting out. Like, there was a quarterback, I think it was Tate Martell, who was a five-star quarterback out of Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, and he went to Ohio State, transfers to, gosh, I don't even know where he went to, and then he ended up transferring four times.
Wow.
And I get it. Quarterback's a unique position. Like if you're not going to play, you don't really want to sit for very long. So I get that. But I think, adding to, your guardrail of, the transfer rule, it's like transfer once, fine, transfer twice. Sorry, now you're going to sit. You can still practice with the team. You're still going to go to school. Where I think the NIL and everything really affects these student athletes is on the education side of things. Because it used to be, and once again, I'm going back to the 1900s when I was recruited, like you went to a school because of their academic programs. You went to a school and part of your recruiting trip was to meet with the dean of broadcast communications, like I did at Washington State University. And it was part of the excitement of this is the degree I'm going to get from this school while I get to play football and basically have it all paid for. when you're transferring every year for 4 years, or even if you have transferred twice, how are you even completing your degree? What transfers between school in terms of credits? Are you even finishing these classes, you know? And so a guardrail or two that I've suggested is the one you had suggested, transfer rules that are a little more stringent. Two, if you were getting X amount of dollars, let's say you're getting six figures, 100,000 to 500,000. It's like a contract. You must stay at that school for at least 2 years. If you're over 500,000, now you're committed to that school for 4. Okay, things like that. Just put little things that make it a little bit harder for these players, because I hate to say this, but there are a lot of players chasing the dollar. They
Yeah.
don't care about their education. They really are just chasing the bigger and better program with the better facilities, the biggest, brightest weight rooms, and the dollar.
Yeah.
And
I've
it's
talked
really
about.
unfortunate because I think that's what's wrecking college football. And I'm going to speak to my son's experience. He goes, it divided the locker room. You got your rich players, and now you got your poor players
Yeah.
in terms of
Yeah.
NIL.
So a couple of thoughts about that. I think there are, there's the NIL that the university can secure, but I think there are other sponsors within a community, within a college town. If a local car dealership wants to, provide an NIL contract to a player, I don't know that they have to go through the university to do
No.
that. And they may be free to negotiate with that player and say, okay, we'll give you this six figure, half of it after the first year, the second half only if you come back for the second year. Otherwise, they might be able to work some things into the contract like that.
And I've seen that happen. The dollar amounts are being parsed out over 12 months, where it's like you get a little bit now, some at the end of the season, and some at the end of the year kind of thing.
Yeah. But the other part of the transferring, and I know as sports fans, get really frustrated of, I'm just rooting for the uniform now. I don't even can't keep track of which player is on the
Yeah.
program and who's staying and who's going. But from the student's perspective, I always go back and think about what's the point of college. So it used to be to get an education, and we would have like a liberal arts degree, and we would want to learn about things that maybe didn't even necessarily relate to a career.
Mm.
And then it shifted to, well, we go to these schools and degrees to prepare us for a career. And if that's the case, do students really need the degree? I mean, I'm going to argue the student's perspective for a moment. If I feel like my career path is a sport, I don't care about a degree. I care about playing time because that's what's preparing me for a career. That's my equivalent to an accountant taking math classes and taking the finance classes to prepare themselves for a degree in accounting. And so I get the logic of a quarterback wanting to hop schools because they want to be in a starting position because they're preparing themselves for a career. Now, the challenge for them is that the career opportunities are so narrow and so limited because there are only 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. So if you don't get that, what have you prepared yourself for? And that's the gap. I wonder if down
But
the
then
road.
why have Amit? Sorry, I'm sorry. I apologize for interrupting. I want to challenge you, and let's have a great debate on this. But
Yeah,
then why bother? Why bother even having college football associated with the school? We might as well have club teams at that point, right?
I was getting. That's
Okay.
exactly why I'm pointing that. And so, and it's not necessarily college, but I think we are going to see some type of farm system not too far from now. And whether it's the NCAA that takes the lead in creating that, or whether it's the professional leagues, and we see it. I mean, Major League Baseball has a farm league, and other sports do as well. But that farm system might be the way to go for sports like football, and basketball has a developmental league as well. We might be headed in that direction more.
Man, I just think about the environment and the pageantry of Saturday afternoons in the fall, and the marching bands, and 90,000 seat stadiums, and the fans that are loyal to their school because they went to that school. So they cheer for that football team, right? Or
Yep.
basketball team, whatever, hockey team. And that's all kind of being torn apart just slowly from the inside out. And that's what disappoints me. And maybe I'm a bit of a homer that way because I went through the system and I played at a school for the 4 years, didn't transfer. My son only just recently transferred because he was already done his degree at Arizona. But I just feel like, yeah, if this goes to a farm league system, and then just move it out of the schools completely and go to, like, baseball has A, double A, triple A ball. But the beauty of the student athlete scholarship was the fact that, and a lot of parents would say this, it's like the chances of making the NFL are less than 1%. In fact, I think it's a fraction of 1% coming out of high school, right?
Right.
Even the top five-star athletes, still, they're at that less than 1%. And the parents are like, but at least they'll have a degree. At least they'll have an education that they can fall back on, that they can get a job and show that they completed something. And that's what I think is the biggest atrocity when it comes to all of this and what may go by the wayside. But you and I could talk about this all day, and I would love to talk about it off camera. I want
Sure.
to get to your book. Let's talk about the new book, The Other Playbook. Once again, brilliant name just because every team has its playbook. It has its thing that that the players have to abide by in terms of not just rules and regulations of the team, but literally the plays that are run each week in practices and in games. So what inspired that? What was the defining moment? And I think you mentioned your boys and the combination of presenting to your boys on PR and communications and branding. But was there a defining moment that really made you realize this message had to be shared?
Yeah. So as I had that light bulb moment, I thought, boy, student athletes really need to hear this message. I just kept my eyes open as I went through my own son's recruiting process. My middle son plays soccer at Case Western University, and he went through a recruiting process. Just watching how he interacted with coaches and other players and college coaches, and then also my time as a volunteer coach and running the travel basketball program in my town, seeing how different kids behaved in different situations. It just occurred to me that we spend so much time teaching kids through a playbook of this is what you need to do on the field, but really didn't spend a lot of time, if any time at all, teaching them this is how you have to develop as a person. And certainly that's a parent's role. And I know parents do a good job of working with their kids and teaching them right from wrong. But this concept of recognizing that you're being watched and judged at all times. And you as a person, you're being judged as a brand. You have brand value. And if you decide that I want to stand for something and you take behaviors to drive that, it can really be a powerful tool for you. And so recognizing that that gap existed really motivated me to write this book. I can give you so many examples. I'll just share one quick one. My
Please.
son who plays soccer, when he was younger and played on a club team, he played on a very competitive club team in MLS Next Division. And, they had one exhibition game where they were absolutely just throttling another team. It wasn't close. And at halftime, the coach pulled everyone together and said, we know we can beat this team. We're not trying to embarrass them. I want you all to just focus on other skills. Let's play from the back. Let's connect passes. Let's do other things we need to work on. Well, one of the players on the team who was one of their leading scorers for the season was a really solid offensive player. In that particular game, he just hadn't happened to score yet. But rather than listen to the coach's words, he had to get his goal. And so while everyone else was following that instruction and passing and playing from the back, at one point he took the ball, dribbled through, scored, finally got his goal, celebrated as we were up like 8-0. And his teammates were looking at him like, what are you doing? And his coach was looking at him like, what are you doing? Now, if I were to try to get into his mind a little bit, I would assume that being a goal scorer was kind of who he was and who he thought he needed to be. He thought he was demonstrating leadership by being a goal scorer, but that's not how he was being perceived. And so to me, there was a really big gap between what he thought he was and how he was being perceived. And, sure enough, a couple of years later, he wasn't on the team anymore. And it wasn't because of offensive talent. I mean, coaches are really looking for specific pieces, specific components, certain things out of their players. And so, players just need to recognize that it's not just coaches who are judging you, but people in all aspects of your life. And you really need to be deliberate about what it is you stand for and taking steps to drive those attributes so that people really perceive them.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I think back to 20 plus years of coaching amateur sport in four different sports. Don't get me wrong, you want that five-star athlete on your team to help you win games, but ultimately it can be that five-star athlete that can also tear your team apart. Just from personality, from the fact that they play more selfish, they really are, it's the spotlight's on them. And maybe to no fault of their own, maybe they, like I said, their identity has been formed in that they are a producer of wins, right? A producer of goals, what have you. But a lot of coaches, if you really press them, would say, I'd rather have a team full of 3-star grinders, kids that put in effort every day. And this is really what sort of motivated me in the effort over results, you know, philosophy was my kids' sport. So you and I are like in that it's our kids that inspired us to come up with what we are doing today. In that, I just want to see that you're putting in effort. I want to see that you work hard day in and day out. The results you can't control. All you can control is your brand, your personality, the things that you physically and intrinsically can control. And I think that's important for a lot of kids to know. And I think for a lot of kids to know that coaches, while yes, they definitely want players that are going to help them win games and championships, they also want those grit and grind players. And those are the kids that are, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, just good, honest, upstanding citizens is first and foremost what they should be trying to develop. And I think a lot of coaches try to do that. There aren't too many coaches left that are literally, I mean, they're being paid to win, yes, but it's not obsessed with the results. They do try to build good young men and women in college sports. So what gap did you see in how we prepare young athletes? Like you'd mentioned your own kids, but I mean, let's open that lens up. What is the gap you saw in young athletes, not just physically, but really mentally and emotionally for not only life after sports, but just making the transition to college and maybe even ultimately to pro? Two different areas, but what are the gaps that they
So I think the biggest thing, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is that athletes are often told this is what you should be, or this is how it should be done, right? These are the values of the team. A coach may have specific values, core values on their team, or the university or high school they play for may have values on the team. We see it in corporate America too. A company may have values that they want their employees to adhere to, but there's nothing that includes the player in that process. And so when I created this book, the way I've written it is it's chapter by chapter. Each chapter is a lesson. And at the end of each chapter, there are exercises where you literally write in the book. So it becomes kind of a workbook. And as you work your way through, by the end, you've got your own plan that you can follow based on the brand attributes that you yourself decided, with actionable steps that you yourself can take. And so that was really the gap of doing something that the athlete can be part of, they can take ownership of. Because let's be honest, we always talk about a team full of leaders, but not all athletes are going to be leaders. And if you have a locker room, not every one player and that athlete is going to be a leader. You simply can't. I mean, some people will rise to the top and other people may show leadership in other ways. Some people may be introverts. And so not every athlete is going to value leadership. An athlete might value more collaboration or teamwork or camaraderie or commitment, being a gym rat, being a film study, intellectual, whatever those things are. So this training actually gives them an opportunity to decide for themselves what it is that I want to stand for. I encourage athletes to think about how do those things resonate, not just in the locker room, but again, throughout for all your customers. So, we talk about in the book, first think about who your customers are. And then as you decide on what your brand attributes are, think about how those might be perceived by all of those customers.
Hmm. This got me thinking at what, and I want to tread lightly here only because I don't want parents or anybody listening to the show to think that we're trying to create a brand out of a 7-year-old. But I think when you talk about brand, if I understand you correctly, Amit, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're really just talking about personality traits, skills, abilities,
Values.
persona,
Yeah.
really how they carry themselves. This isn't about logo and color. This isn't about, which car dealership do I want to work for? It's not about that. Brand really, and for all people, even us as just regular adults. If you have a Facebook account, if you have an Instagram account, what you place on those accounts is your brand.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of you. So if I post a bunch of political posts, and I'm not going down that road, but if we do on our Facebook or Instagram, people get a pretty good idea of what our quote unquote brand is, right? At,
100%.
at what age can you start working with a young student athlete to start developing that brand? Meaning you're not taking it out of the parents' hands, but you're now that guide on the side for them.
Yeah, I actually think that this is something that the parents can do with their kids. So I absolutely wouldn't want to take it out of the parents' hands. But I wrote the book specifically for high school and college student athletes and for coaches to work with their student athletes. For my own boys, I mentioned two are in college and they read the book and went through it and enjoyed it. My youngest is still in high school. He's a sophomore. And, I had to, nudge him along to read a little bit. And 10th grade boy doesn't really enjoy reading. So, okay, well, let me go through it with you. And so I said, read the first chapter, do the exercises, and let's talk about it. And it was really an eye opening experience because I really enjoyed the discussion and the conversations that the book sparked. Like I would ask him, okay, well, you said that these customers are important to you. Why? And why are these people more important to you than these people? And it unexpectedly created such a great conversation with my 10th grader that I didn't think I would have. And when it came time to select his brand values, which he did on his own, I asked him, like, well, why did you choose this? What did you think about here? And I noticed he was getting a little too locked in with sports. And I said, well, how do you think people outside of sports would view this when you say you want to do this? And so it really sparked some great discussion. I think high school is probably the a good age to start. And I do really think that, in addition to coaches and athletic directors, it's a great tool for parents to go through with their kids. And we talked about earlier, we teach kids how to run the right play on the field or on the court. But this, with parents' guidance or a mentor's guidance, really helps them set up the behaviors that drive that positive brand, right? And so with my 10th grader, he said, well, you know, I want to be seen as coachable. That was one of the brand attributes he was discussing. And we talked about how that would look outside of the realm of sports as well. And we agree that, yeah, an employer would really like the fact that you're coachable, you're willing to learn. And then when it came time to discuss behaviors, I said, you can't just tell people you're coachable. What does that look like? How would you demonstrate that? And he got a little stuck. And I said, well, some of the things you may already do. I said, when you're on the basketball court and your coach is, telling you how to run the play, are you looking at your shoes or are you looking him in the eye? And he said, I look him in the eye. I said, well, that demonstrates that you're coachable, right? And so again, a lot of this is age appropriate stuff, but with a parent's guidance, you can help that child think about what are the things that are important to you. What are the behaviors you can drive to demonstrate that it's important to you and how that's perceived by different people in your life. And if you carry those behaviors consistently over a long period of time, that's how you build the brand. It's not telling people you're a leader or a team player. It's behaving in that way over a long period of time so that you don't have to tell people, so that people see it for themselves.
That reminds me of a story, and that I can relate to that is that my son came out of the middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan, Canada. You don't build Division 1 football players in our province up here. That usually comes out of the Vancouvers, the Torontos, the Montreals, the largest cities in the country. Keeping the story short, but 14 Division 1 offers, eventually gets to the University of Arizona, but he was struggling because, coaches really didn't know who he was. He came from a nowhere. What kind of league did he play in? Spent the first
Mhm.
2 years, really trying to develop his brand with the coaches. And he was getting frustrated because he wasn't getting any opportunities. And I said to him, and this is really where EOR was born out of, partially at least, in that I said to him, all you can control is your effort and your attitude. And I know that sounds cliche, but it's really all you can control. You can't control what decisions the coaches are going to make, but you can develop an undeniable stack of proof that you are who you say you are. And that is never missing meetings, never missing workouts, first to volunteer if they need someone to, step up for something. Like literally don't give them an excuse to put a black mark on your report card at
Right.
all.
I love that. I love
And
that.
let the then at that point it's up to God and the universe and the coach's decision making to decide if you're going to play. He did that for a full year and a half. And we kept preaching to him, effort over results, effort over results, effort over results. Just control what you can control. Don't worry about them, but don't give them a reason either, right? Sure enough. when that opportunity came, he was the first one they called on to fill in, and then he played the rest of the season. And that's what inspired me to really get people to understand that you can't control the results. We can't be obsessed about titles and accolades and gold medals and wins and whatever. It's all good. We want to win, we want to achieve, but you can't control achievement. You only can control the effort you put in on a day-to-day basis and getting a little bit better every day, and having the integrity that, like you said, Amit, coaches, uh, potential NIL sponsors, your teammates, parents, people around you see and go, that's a good kid. I want
Yeah.
that kid on my team. Regardless of talent level, I want that kid on my team because of just who they are and the brand that they've built. So let me ask you this as we start to come up to the top of the hour. The title, once again, love the title, The Other Playbook. What does the other refer to? And how do you define success in that context?
The other refers to teaching students these skills that they normally don't get. We have a playbook for sports. This is the other playbook to build the best version of you in school, sports, and life. And so success is how true you can be to what you say you want to be, right? So a funny story, when I gave this training to a classroom of students years ago, 10 seconds into the training, I'd just been introduced. I say my first sentence, and a kid raises his hand and says, "What's your brand?" And I knew it was going to be one of those classes. He was constantly challenging me and pushing me. And I said, "Well, that's a great question. I'm not going to tell you what my brand is because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I say it is. It's what you perceive it to be." And
Love that.
so what we'll do is let me get through the presentation. I'm going to ask you at the end of this, presentation what you think my brand is, and I'll write down and let's see how closely they align. And so he liked that. He went through it. And so for me, the definition of success is how close that gap can be, right? Of what you believe you want to demonstrate, those brand values, and how the people in your life perceive you. If they can perceive you how you want to be perceived, that's success. And I love the way you frame that with your son, like build that undeniable stack of proof. Those are the things that you can control. And we talk about this in the book, like your brand is what you can control, but there are also, you have to be aware that there are factors outside of your control that could impact your brand, good or bad. Your coach could get fired and a new coach can come in, and that might be good, it might be bad. You don't know. You can't control that, but there are still things that you can control, right? And so I really like sticking to your plan, consistent, repeatable behaviors, and as close as you can get to having your audiences perceive you to how you want to be perceived. To me, that's success.
Well, and I think a lot of student athletes, they'll sit there and they'll bitch and whine and complain that they're not getting playing time and the coach doesn't give me opportunities and whatever. And maybe that's the case, but for a lot of them, they have to kind of turn the mirror on themselves and go, okay, am I giving the coach, like I said with my son, are you giving the coach a reason to not play you, to not give you opportunities? So why don't you, first of all, once again, as we did with our son, it's like build that undeniable stack of proof through action, not through just saying, through action, that you are who that you say you are and that you want to be projected as and what your brand is. Do that for 6 months. Do that for maybe an entire season if you have to. And if at that point you still feel like you're just getting the short end of the stick in terms of playing time or whatever, okay, maybe now it's time to transfer, right?
Right.
But too many kids think just project it on the coach, project it on the program, project it on their assistant coach, whoever that leads them, and it's never their fault, especially with the high end, the 4 or 5 star kids. Like they can't do any wrong because their entire life has just been everybody applauding them for how great they are, right? It's important to turn that back at the student athlete, and that's tough to do with teenagers. It's one thing to do it and give feedback to an adult. Give it to a teenager, it's very tough. They have to be open to that first. I want to talk about coaches that may read the book or hear the message that you're sending. So if you could get every coach in North America that teaches at that high school or college level to understand one principle, one message that you're really trying to bring forth in the Other Playbook, your new book, what would that be?
Well, it's to help the kids understand, and you touched on it in your last comment, that the single biggest factor to determining the success or failure, if you want to call it that, of a brand is you. You control all of it, right? And so rather than asking, what's the coach doing for me? What's the team? What's the school? Think about what you can do for yourself. And I think for coaches, it's, giving students this guidance, going through the book with them, helping them understand first what brand value is. We're not just talking about getting a commercial or NIL deal, but understanding what are your values and helping their students and players think about that and take some ownership of that, of who is the person you want to be, and then guiding them in the steps to helping them get there. I think too many times we feel like we have to tell students, you need to be this, you need to be this. And, I think there's some value to that. We have to have team values, school values. I get that. But coaches, I think, should really understand that if you give students the ownership to help them decide the people that they want to be, they'll surprise you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's important for coaches to not only, I mean, the name coach it's indicative of helping someone grow, taking someone through, the ups and downs of being a student athlete or an employee or even your own children. But really I think coaches should do more to have those performance review feedback type of discussions with their athletes. And I don't think that happens enough. It's like, okay, if and I even told my son, why don't you just ask your coach? Like, is there anything I can do differently or better that I'm not doing already? Because I feel like I'm doing what I can, but maybe I'm missing something, coach. And those coaches need to be good leaders and open enough to having that question posed to them and not giving, sorry, a BS answer.
Yeah.
And
It,
giving good, solid, productive feedback that is not critical, that's not anything other than something that the student athlete can control, correct?
Yeah, yep. It goes both ways, though. I mean, I keep reflecting on your comment that the student athlete has to turn the mirror on themselves a little bit. I
Mhm.
remember soccer player son when he played at his club team. The coach there was pretty upfront with the parents, and he said, "I don't, if your player asks me for help, I will certainly help them, but I really don't like questions around what do I need to do to get better." Because we tell them regularly, like, if you want to play in college, you need to be one of the top three on this team in offense, defense, transition. And we give them the drills. We have all these Google playbooks, we have
Mhm.
YouTube videos. And so, my first question I'm going to ask them is, have you done all these drills? How much time do you spend outside of practice? And so, if the player is doing those things, then yes, but to go to a coach and say, what do I need to be doing more? I think rule number one is, well, what's your plan? What are your brands? And are you sticking to that? Because a lot of times they just need to do the work, right? And so it's not, again, it's not saying I'm going to be the best teammate or I'm going to be the best offensive player, or what's the work you're putting in behind those words to make it so.
Well, and going back to the EOR philosophy of effort over results, it's if a player came to me and I was a coach and a player came to me and said, hey coach, I feel like, my playing time's gone down or I'd like to get more playing time, is there anything that I can do more of? And I agree, like the coach can say, listen, we provided you with a lot of the tools, but I push back on that just a little bit because the kid has come to you for guidance. And if you just kind of throw it back in their face that, and I'm not saying you said this, Amit, but some coaches do this. It's like, listen, we do the drills in practice. You need to be top three on defense, offense, and transition analysts. And those are all results based, sort of, a couple of them are kind of more results based messaging. I think what the kid is looking for is more, what are the intangibles that I'm not doing? Is there something in my body language? Is there something in the, something I said at practice? Because a lot of times these kids are not self-aware. Their frontal cortex doesn't develop till 25. They need to know a little bit more about how they're behaving as opposed to whether they're performing athletically on the field, right? And I think that's where coaches can show a little bit more of that softer side and guidance and true coaching and mentoring side is to provide that feedback to the kid, because you can have a kid who's doing everything, but it's like, you know what? And I'll use my son's name, Leif. When we get down in games, I notice that you kind of sulk on the sideline. That's not good for the rest of your team. They see that you're a leader here, and they drop down too. Kids don't recognize they're doing that.
Right.
And that's the kind of feedback I think a lot of coaches and parents can give to kids is things like that. So I think we're on the same page on it. I think
Yeah.
really there needs to be more than just athletics coaching going on, especially at the younger ages. Once you get to university, yes, you've got to turn it on the athlete more because these coaches don't have time to literally do one-to-ones with all these athletes. I want to wrap up here. So going back to your time in corporate culture, do you see any parallels between locker room dynamics, corporate culture, and what can business leaders learn from team sports and maybe vice versa?
Well, that's a great question. I think there are probably a lot of interesting parallels when you have a team. You've got these leaders that naturally emerge, right? If you think about any team project, someone's going to take the lead and steer the workflow. But I think one of the things is every person has a place on that team and every person can add value in their own way. And so identifying what each person's role is and helping them maximize that role to the best of their ability is what's going to help you have the most successful sports team and business team. We talked about it earlier about talent. You could have the most talented people on one field. That team may not win. It's not just talent, it's finding the best team. And so for an athletics team, with each person thinking about how can I contribute to this team? I might not be the scorer. Maybe I'm the defender. Maybe I'm the facilitator. Who knows what it is? I've also coached teams where a kid didn't get that much playing time, but they were really, really vocal on the bench. And that got the team really pumped up. And so I think that's the biggest parallel I see between the athletics and the business. Every team, you'll have your leaders, but everyone's got a role that can contribute to the success of that team.
And that speaks directly to recognition of effort because you're going to have kids on your team that aren't participating on the field because maybe they're a backup, maybe they're just not good enough to be on the field for very long, but they're putting effort into being that cheerleader on the sideline to hyping up the rest of the players. They still put in a lot of great effort. And if you only recognize the effort of your producers, and I mean goals and assists and on-field performance, you're losing half the battle, if not more, because there only are a handful of those players on your team that are really the ones that are actually scoring the goals, scoring the touchdowns, and so forth, right? You've got to recognize the effort of every individual on the team for what they contribute. And that's why what I think you said about role playing and the role that you do play at whatever level you're at is so important. And why teams that win championships are built on role players and everybody understanding what their part is, right?
Yeah.
The best teams in the world, even the dynasty teams, the New England Patriots, the Bulls in the 80s, and 90s, you had your Dennis Rodmans who literally was brought in just to rebound and play defense, right?
Right.
Steve Kerr, strictly just a three-point shooter. Everybody has to play a role. And I think in business, it's the same thing. But business leaders, just like coaches, recognize the people who aren't your star players for what they contribute. That's how you build great culture. Let's finish up here. And I'm still staying on the book. So if there's a student athlete listening right now and they're feeling uncertain and I'm leaning towards my own son, but I know there's a lot of student athletes out there and they're starting to wrap up, let's say, their college career. Their identity has been as a student athlete for 4 to 5 years, 7 for some. And they're uncertain as to what there is beyond sport. What message do you give them?
Think about, again, goes back to think about the person that you want to be. You were wrapped up in sports for so long, but a lot of the things you valued in sports, people will find value outside of sports. And so, again, this concept of thinking of yourself as a product, right? Your sports career is winding down. You're looking at the rest of your life. What do you want that product to be? Do you want to be seen as a good writer, creative, kind, spiritual? I mean, there are literally hundreds of different brand values that you can choose from. And in the book, there's actually a list that you kind of go through and figure out what do you most closely associate with. And it's kind of like you're the chief marketing officer of you. You get to design your own product. What do you want that to look like? And once you figure that out, then what are the steps to drive those And it's interesting for people, especially athletes, going through that transition because a lot of times those brand attributes are based on what we're good at, right? But it could also be our strengths combined with our aspirations. I might not be a good writer now, but I want to be known as a good writer. I want that to be a brand value. Okay, fine. Let's come up with the steps to get you there. So it's that combination of strengths, aspirations, of figuring out the best version of you. And when you lean into that and commit to doing the work, again, you won't have to tell people, I'm a good writer or I'm a good teammate or I'm this. They will see it from your actions.
Love that. I know there's a lot of student athletes out there that are, in their final, say, season or couple seasons, and they've been, especially at the Division 1 level, their identity literally has been more athlete than student, and their lives are lived at the facility, the athletic facility. They barely go home. They get their degree, but then they're like, okay, what did I just accomplish here besides 5 years of football or basketball or hockey? I got a degree, but now what do I do with it? I think that's something that through you and your coaching, but also something that the schools need to do a better job of is helping these seniors network and getting out into the community more as they start to wind down their career and get them ready for, going into the work world. Because if you take a look at it, the majority of Fortune 500 CEOs, a lot of them are former athletes at
Right.
whatever level, but they are because there's just the synchronicity between and a synergy between being an athlete and learning the things you do when you're an athlete in your younger years, to being a good leader, to being part of a team, to having discipline. And I think that's something that a lot of these student athletes, and going back to the NIL conversation, I worry about them because now they've been handed thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're going to feel like, well, I got lots of money. I don't need to, if I don't play pro, I don't need anything more than that. But that money doesn't last very long. And so I think it's important for these schools to help develop that. And I think it's books like yours that will help them develop their brand while they're in high school and then into college, that will help them if they don't go pro. Amit, I want to finish with some lightning round questions. Tell me one book or maybe an influencer in your industry that really has, resonated for you in the last few years here and has helped you on this journey with the Other Playbook?
Well, the one, I mean, it's kind of the sports world, but I keep going back to Rick Pitino's book, Success is a Choice. That's one that I talk to my kids about and I read many, many years ago. And it just, I talk to my kids, when you see these athletes out there who are successful, got the big contract, it didn't happen by luck. It's not luck. It is a choice. It's a series of choices every day. And he does a great job of outlining that in his book, how, all right, do you want to study for your test or you want to go out with your friends and party? Or do you want to wake up early and go to the weight room or do you want to sleep in? Each of those is a choice that's going to contribute to your success years from now. And there are choices that you make. So that's one that I know that I failed on the lightning round. I kind of got deep into it, but success is a choice is one that always resonated with me.
Excellent. Something a coach or mentor, somebody said to you in your life at any time that really still resonates with you today.
I think back to one of my best bosses and I kind of thought about why do I think he's such a great boss? And when I really dissected it, I realized he never told me to do anything. He simply just asked questions. And so there wasn't any one specific thing that he said, but he was great at asking questions. And I think good leaders, good bosses, good coaches, they get the most out of their players when they ask them the right questions.
How can amateur sport coaches, and when I say amateur, I mean before college, so
Mhm.
from the ages of like little, like 5 up to say 17, how can they improve right now, besides X's and O's?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to keep it fun, right? I mean, and this is a whole other podcast, but I think at the amateur level, youth sports, there's so much emphasis on winning and not enough on skill development and just fun. Uh,
Effort over result.
right. I mean, there's so much research about burnout in sports and how many players quit a sport before the age of 13. And so I think keeping it fun and letting players have some more ownership of the process. Like
Mhm.
when I coached, we would always, the last drill, the kids got to choose what's the drill that you want to do? What's your favorite drill? And so giving them some ownership in the process as well.
Amit, this has been an incredible conversation. I know you and I could talk for hours on this stuff, and maybe we'll have another episode and we'll get it deeper into NIL and let's you and I fix the world of NIL. How about that?
Let's
Um,
do it.
I love how the other playbook, which by the way, everybody, Amit's new book. It takes something that so many of us overlook. It's the mental, the emotional, the communication side of competition, and really just turns it into a real framework for leadership. So whether you're a student athlete, a coach, or a parent, there is something in this message in this episode for you today. If you want to learn more about Amit's work or grab a copy of the Other Playbook, you can check out r3communications.pro. I'll link it below.
Yes.
And if this episode hits home, do me a favor, share it with a coach, a teammate, anyone who needs a reminder that who you become matters more than what you achieve. Amit, are there other places people can find you or the book?
Yes, you can find it on Amazon. It actually recently just got certified as an Amazon bestseller, so I'm really excited
Awesome.
about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I've got a website for the book too, theotherplaybook.com.
Excellent. Well, this is Effort Over Results. Amit, thanks for being on the show. Everyone, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.